I'm Ben Reiman, and this is Behavior Speak.
I look at how many less kids would have been impacted by the juvenile justice system had we understood neurodivergency or had we appreciated neurodivergency earlier, back in the 90s, back in the 80s, back in the 90s, even back in the 2000s. You can see some, if you look at the juvenile justice numbers, Ben, right now, from the 80s to 90s. 80s, they were going up, 90s really high, 2000s, they're starting to plateau, then 2010 is 2020, they're decreasing again. But I attribute that to part of it, on the attention on youth in carceral spaces and the impacts of that and long-lasting effects and the cost of it, but also to understanding and appreciation for neurodivergency. Like, hey, these aren't bad kids. You know, whatever you want to call them. These are kids that are dealing with stuff.
A lot of people hadn't really they've heard of ABA, but they didn't know of ABA. They didn't know what that, because the connotation is typically autism. It's typically, and then if you depending on what type of research that you've done on ABA, you look at all the myths, or what have you. I think one of the things we actually talked about was some of the myths of ABA. One of the key ones was bribery versus reinforcement. And just explaining that to them, you just saw like the light bulbs go off, like, oh, first then statements, like things that as ABA practitioners, wow. It's just, you don't even think about it. But then for those who haven't been experienced or don't know it, like, they're like, oh. But what was so helpful, because the way I was explaining it was that although we're talking about it in a correctional educational framework, this applies everywhere. It applies like using this at home, using this at work, using this in the community. I don't know if you remember this, Larome, we also talked about comfort and solution. When talking with individuals and talking about their problems, whether or not when they're discussing this with you, are they discussing this for comfort or are they discussing this for a solution? Because if they're discussing it for comfort, I'm listening. If they discuss it for solution, now I'm listening with the intent that I'm going to provide an answer, because most of us want to provide an answer. You give us like, hey, this is what's going on in my life. This is what's going on like in the correct, and you just want to tell them what to do because you've lived it or you think you have the best answer. But sometimes they just want comfort and just knowing that you're listening.
What happens when a behavior analyst and a juvenile justice leader sit down to talk about neurodivergent youth in corrections? In this episode of Behavior Speak, I'm joined by Dr. Larome Myrick, Executive Director of Youth Justice for the State of Rhode Island, and Anthony Bronaugh Sr., Behavior Analyst, Educator, and former school administrator. Together, they bring decades of experience working with young people across schools, residential programs, and correctional settings. Our conversation challenges many of the assumptions people hold about juvenile justice, neurodiversity, and behavior. We explore how neurodivergent youth have historically been misunderstood in both education and correctional systems, how labels and stigma can shape life trajectories, and why prevention, support, and understanding are more effective than punishment. We also discuss the school-to-prison pipeline, the role of behavior analysis in correctional settings, what correctional classrooms actually look like, and how systems can better support youth before they ever enter the justice system. This is an important conversation about moving beyond labels, breaking down silos, and recognizing that every young person deserves the opportunity to succeed. Enjoy my conversation with Dr. Larome Myrick and Anthony Bronaugh Sr.
Thank you.
Yeah, excited. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge I'm an uninvited settler occupier on the traditional lands of the Klam and Kleus Homoko Comox First Nations, who have been stewards of this land since time immemorial. Larome, Anthony, maybe we could get started by talking a bit about...
Well, Anthony and I, we've been colleagues and friends and fraternity brothers for quite a while. And actually, before I even joined the fraternity, I knew about Anthony, so I watched him just do his work and everything like that, his role as principal and just as a leader in our community. And just to kind of, he's going to give you the real substance of it, but just to come to the end of it, and Anthony will fill in, when we finally got the opportunity to do a presentation together, we said, hey, this is it, being the work that he does, being a BCBA and behavior analyst and my work in youth justice. So we're like, hey, there's a lot of intersection between the two. So once we got the opportunity to actually do something together, for me, it was a no-brainer. I got to work with a friend, mentor, and fraternity brother of mine, and And that was a full circle moment
kind
for
of just
myself.
gradually happened over time, where seeing Larome's trajectory and his career, and educationally as well. And I had presented at a Corrections Education Association conference prior to that. And every blue moon, I would reach out to Larome and say, "Hey, man, we got to do something together. We got to put something together. We got to work together, or whatever." Because what we were doing, well, we were in different silos, but we had a lot in common. And so when it came available for the Corrections Education Association, their international conference in Pittsburgh, I called him up immediately and said, "Hey, we have an opportunity to present together. It would be phenomenal. I know his energy. I know his background, his expertise." Um, and it was correct. As soon as we got to the conference, half the people either knew who he was, were like, "Oh my God," like in awe or whatever. And I was like, "This is great. This is great." And so when we were able to present and kind of bring both of our expertise together, um, it was phenomenal. I look forward to hopefully being able to collaborate and do that again. But that weekend, or those couple of days, were phenomenal.
I'll just add to that too as well. I got to be a co-presenter, which is great. But more importantly, I got to be a student out there. So it was funny when I wasn't presenting, I was just listening to Anthony, like, "Oh my God, I need to employ these skills that just in my own personal life and just through, being a parent, working with young people, being a supervisor, being a leader, just as a regular person." So I actually got to sit down and be a student. Now, I did a couple sneak previews beforehand because as we were prepping in advance of everything, I was taking it and learning it. So, but then to watch him deliver it when I wasn't speaking, I was trying to hurry up and rush mine so I could hear like what's going to be next, what's going to be next.
Yeah.
It was a great time. I still talk about that and think about that often.
Yeah, I love that. Let's start by hearing just a little bit about the different roles. So, Larome, tell me what it is you do. What's the context you work in? The kind of work you're doing. A little bit about your history.
Well, I've been in. This is my 26th year actually in this work. July 31st is back in my 26th year, and it'll be my 8th year in Rhode Island. But the work that I'm in, I've been in corrections. So I started my career in the adult system. I was 19 years old, got hired as a corrections officer, started at age 20 in a close security prison in Ohio. Didn't really plan on being there that long. I was like, I'm gonna get one check and then leave. And maybe I still have not got that one check because I'm still in the work. So I'm still waiting for that one check. Or perhaps we go viral like we talked about earlier, then this is my last day working and I'll just do this full time. But no, I've been in corrections for 26 years. I started in the adult system, worked my way up and around. And most recently, I've served as the executive director of our youth justice division and for the state of Rhode Island. So I oversee anything dealing with youth, going into the system, leaving the system, community supervision. And I put a lot of energy on prevention and diversion as well, kids involved in the systems and
So
their release.
my journey was somewhat
And you,
similar
Anthony?
in terms of I started off actually in juvenile justice as well, working at in Toledo, the Lucas County Youth Treatment Center. I had worked at a residential treatment facility for boys and for boys and girls with substance abuse. They had a separate division. And so I did that during undergrad just to kind of to make ends meet, to get through college, pay for myself. I just had my son at that time. And so that's how I got my first taste. And so once I graduated with my bachelor's in English, I fell in love with working with individuals with disabilities, significant behaviors, severe behaviors, and that came through working in the juvenile justice realm. And so, but it kind of took me on a trajectory of going toward or working in education, working in special education, and because of my desire to want to be a leader, I then became a dean of students, an assistant principal, a principal, at a relatively a early age, probably too early because I became a dean of students or assistant principal at the age of 26, and that was really young, and so um, made some mistakes, not decided, I burned out and decided I still love behavior. I still love working with kids and so I learned about ABA, didn't know anything about it. Kind of this is how that we talk about in our field, how we kind of fell into it. And so I fell in love with it, and I was like, oh, I've been doing this, but I didn't know it was ABA. And so in the course of trying to disseminate ABA to different organizations, genres, and just wherever I could, it just seemed fitting that it would be in corrections, because I remember working in corrections, we were literally punishment based. It was very little reinforcement. And so again, then seeing where Larome was at and what he was doing, it was like, this is perfect, because we could help one another, because I didn't want it to just be working with individuals with autism. I didn't want it to be just working in schools. I wanted to disseminate ABA beyond those thresholds. And so here I am now, working in different settings, and still the goal is to disseminate ABA, however and wherever I can. So right now I'm consulting, primarily
And what kind of work are you doing right now,
a
Anthony?
school that I helped to actually start in Ohio. New Story schools are throughout the East Coast and in Ohio, but they weren't in Toledo. And just by a chance encounter at an ABA conference, one conversation led to, hey, can you help us to start a school in Toledo, Ohio? And within 7 or 8 months, we started a ABA concept school, grades K through 12. And we started August 18th. And at the end of this school year, we'll completed our first year. And then by next year, we'll be fully a private chartered school. And so I'm helping to consult with the schools, consult with the other New Story schools in Ohio, while also working in daycares and just other entities as it relates to autism or severe behaviors.
For me, it's a few different things. One is the young people, depending on the age we're looking at, are 6 to 12% of our population right now at any given time, but they're 100% of the future. And so we spend time focused on siloing the kids, and this group of kids are behavior kids, this group of kids, juvenile justice kids, this group of kids are bad kids, this group of kids are the superb, super smart kids. If we keep siloing kids, then it's not going to go well for any of us. And that's the reason why me and Anthony always been wanting to work together, and we got the opportunity to work. We found some folks want to hear both of us in the same room at the same time. And so we were like, you know what? Let's talk to folks about breaking down these silos and going beyond the labels, because that's what this stuff is. These are our kids. 100% of us start out as kids, and these are the kids that we're gonna have in the world doing the work. So if we can get in front of the kids earlier, support the kids. One, don't forget we were kids. Because the older I get, I'm like, oh, I forgot you should do that. But just understanding that they're understanding normal adolescent normal adolescent behavior, adolescent development. Just understanding that the kids are gonna do kid things, and that we should just work to continue to support them. So that's what I would do. And again, tearing down the silos, breaking down the silos.
And I want to look at it from a paradigm shift for educators, regardless if they're in a corrections facility or if they're in traditional school settings, and that the way that we teach students and the way we have taught students, 30, 40 years ago, 60, 70 years ago is different today. And so if we're still continuing that model of how we're educating kids the same way that we did 70, 80 years ago, that means we haven't really evolved. And our paradigm shift, we have that fixed mindset. And having that fixed mindset doesn't allow for growth in our students. If we think, well, do it my way, it's either my way or the highway, or we're not providing academic choices, or we're not understanding the needs of those individuals, and understanding how trauma also affects those students, in addition to if that student is experiencing any type of neurodivergency. And so my standpoint is more so from a training standpoint, because most teachers in their, I know things have changed, but to some degree, that undergraduate experience and that graduate experience, unless it was based in ABA or special education, you don't get those foundational pieces of ABA and how that could work into a classroom. So typically our default is to revert back to how we were taught, the things that work best for us. And when things aren't going well, we go back to that. So if we can teach and have educators understand that there needs to be a paradigm shift in how we're teaching, why we're teaching, providing academic choice, understanding social and emotional learning, understanding trauma, and then kind of putting that together. What I want to do and what I believe Larome wants to do is create a framework. And within that framework that we're giving, which is ABA principles, trauma-informed care, you paint that picture within that framework.
Larome, I'm wondering, how does sitting at the executive level change how you see responsibility towards neurodivergent youth?
So how to sit at the executive level? One, I realize it's everybody's role to do it. And the thing about neurodivergent youth is it's not as what I refer to as sexy right now. That's not the thing that people are talking about. We talk about the youth on the extremes. You know, you super duper achievers or super duper underachievers. But yet, or we'll talk about youth in the justice system, or we'll talk about you doing X, Y, or Z in schools, but we don't talk about that neurodivergent youth. That's why when I got a platform, well, let me back up. I think a lot of us don't understand it in a way. And so just speaking for transparency, myself, it wasn't until I got this role I started understanding about neurodivergency and what it is and the wide spectrum and everything. We can go back to I was born back in the 1900s, the way we labeled different things. You talked earlier about labels. But now, at least since I've been in this role since 2018, I've been learning a lot more. Still tiny bits. So I think it's up to us at these levels to make sure that we are, we do have a understanding of neurodivergency and our role in that. And our role in that is to support, is to not exclude, is to not silo, but it's to support, is to educate and to inform folks of this is what's happening, this is how we're doing it. And obviously you want to do it with the with those impacted populations as well, because I don't believe in trying to solve something without people or help people without them being involved. I can say lately though, since I've learned a lot more about neurodivergency, I'm able to recognize and have a deeper appreciation for it at my level. Like, okay, everybody does things differently, so why they do it. So it doesn't get on your nerves or it doesn't make you uncomfortable or nothing like that. Like, okay, this is just like it's nothing to be afraid of.
And before you guys started working together, how was neurodivergence typically framed in your systems?
In ours, in the juvenile justice system, it was a behavior. We just said kids couldn't adjust. And that's all we said, like, okay, they're just acting up. They're refusing to do X, Y, and Z. Again, I wasn't in this role during those days, but since I got into the role, fortunately, I didn't hear about that. And my time working with youth in the current state I'm in Rhode Island, because we had some staff members who deal with neurodivergency, and so they understood. And then I have another staff member, or a couple of staff members who children have neurodivergent youth, and we also have those in the facility that I'm in now. And so it actually, I won't call it cool to see, but it's kind of like, well, kind of cool or refreshing to see. Like we have one staff member who has a neurodivergent youth, and we have a resident who's a neurodivergent, and to hear the staff advocate based on their own personal experience as well. Like, well, young men, I call them all little Johnny. Little Johnny is dealing with X, Y, and Z. So this is the best way to do it. And to hear the staff advocate and support, it's like it's really, really refreshing. So it's not like the days of old or the 1900, or even maybe some other places that exist now. But I do love seeing my staff advocate for it. So it's like, wow, this is, because it's just an educational piece for me, and they're advocating it from personal experiences.
I love that. And I think that's something important too, in that I think one thing, I don't know if you see this, Anthony, in your work, there's something I've seen more and more over the years in my work, and, working primarily with neurodivergent folks, is that staff are starting to come out of the word work and self-identify or identify themselves as being neurodivergent, and and starting to see that there's some and certainly with, I think, a lot of the reform type kind of conversations that are happening in our field, Anthony, around neurodiversity affirming practice, and it seems like it can be a real positive to have staff and BCBAs and folks like that are neurodivergent, working with these kids, and it provides kind of a different level of empathy. I think it provides some more understanding for sort of the external community who's kind of trying to figure out what's going on. Have you noticed that, Larome, sort of in your space, where staff are now starting to sort of identify more and make those connections and kind of help educate everybody?
I do. I do. I have some staff who has identified as being neurodivergent, and then some staff we've identified, like, hold on, I know something about you. I work with you. We got something in common. And again, it's that because we've removed the stigma of neurodiversity, of labels, period, but in particular neurodivergency. When I first started in corrections in this work back almost 30 years ago, if you wanted to see a psychologist or psychiatrist for anything, you were excluded from prohibited from having a job. So if there was something I would ever battling with anything, I couldn't publicly say it because I could never get a job. And if you work in the criminal justice field, then you have to have a job. I mean, we're not sought out beyond the criminal justice experience. So God forbid you work for maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and then you want to get some type of help or assistance or dealing with something. But lately, at least probably past 10 years, you hear about neurodivergency. So I talk about, and when we talk about this, it's important to have neurodivergent folks, whether they tell you or not, in there, because we talk about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a lot of time it's focused solely around race, and which I think DEI is a great thing. I mean, there are little issues of form with it, but you also need to, I don't mean but to negate it, I'm saying, but as an and, we also need to look at include neurodivergency in there as well, because again, I had a supervisor, former supervisor, who, and he would tell you he was dealt with neurodivergency, but he's one of the best people I worked with, and had we not, but one, it brought a diverse array of people, different array of ideas and thinking and stuff like that. And I always joke that I'm actually hired for a couple of roles now. And the person in the role, he was like, do not hire another Larome. He like, do not hire another Larome. He like, we need a Larome, but we just need one. And that's the benefit of this DEI in general, to include neurodivergency. Like if I hire one person with just this, we don't want the old days of, I think it was IBM, where everybody's dressed alike and looked alike. And we all heard the commercial where I think one day the CEO, I believe it was IBM, but he wore the same thing every single day. And he got on TV and they were like, oh, he did forgot his tie or made a mess of his tie, and they had to change his wardrobe up. So the next day, after he was on TV, he went to work. Everybody else changed their wardrobe up to match what he did. That's that group thing, and that gets us nowhere. It keeps us closed in a box. Or if you take a wide array of people and different ideas, thoughts, experiences, you can do that. And the other piece I would add, because I'm trying to be cognizant of the time, is when we work with people who are neurodivergent as well, not as colleagues, but also as our clients or students or whatever. So how can you work with a population when you either exclude that population, that we can't hire them or we won't work with them, or we just don't have them, we don't understand them? So again, we talk about in the DEI world of representation, and you need to have, if you're working with neurodivergent folks,
we could all argue. I can argue and submit to you that at some point we're all on the neurodivergent spectrum to some degree. And, undiagnosed, it happens all the time. Like in my work, even before I became a BCBA, like, I think I have this. Or, I have this, or I know as a child, I experienced all these things. If I would have been diagnosed, I probably would have had, a concrete diagnosis. I know even in the private sector, might be doing some parent training, parents would say, I believe that I have autism, or I believe I have ADHD. I just wasn't diagnosed with it. I have all these markers, and, and you hear it all the time, like the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, or another thing like heredity loads the gun, environment pulls the trigger. You see a lot of different things in terms of like when parents come in for IEP meetings and you meet and you're like, I see it. but they're not maybe diagnosed, but I see it, and including myself. I'm sure if someone was to, see my kids and then see me, they'd be like, yep, I get it now. So yes, that has been a trend, but I believe it's continued. But like Larome said, because the stigma is no longer there, people feel more comfortable in sharing these type of things because it's an open topic that's now acceptable. As before, it was, oh, you don't want to tell someone that there may be something wrong with you because now you're potentially excluding yourself from job opportunities, access to different things, because you said that you may have something, although that person you were sharing that with probably had something as well, but they were masking that as well.
Can I have more piece on you're saying, B, you talk about going back a couple of questions ago, you talk about at the executive level. So some of the things that I do, even I'm doing it right now, I'll show you. If you all saw, like I'm real fidgety. And so like on this car, I keep fidget spinners and toys. I've been doing this the entire time under my desk. I got all kind of just different things. But as a leader too, as an executive, when I go to conference and people give us toys too, so I don't have to spend a lot of my own money. But in doing so, I always I have a whole entire desk full of just, and I'm saying, see, we got the same one. And I'm saying, and beyond just neurodiversity, but I keep tons of I got balls, everything. I keep all of that on my desk. I got a shelf from Bermuda, just the stuff that I keep on there just to help. But I do that I secretly I do it for me too, but I also do it for my team. And you wouldn't amaze. I just came in one day, didn't even say anything, had all these toys on my desk, and I see people doing this or grabbing them. I even had a few of these. Some days we'll just be sitting there working. Okay, now let's just race these until it gets fun, just to break the day up.
And it's funny. I'm glad you brought that up. And Ben, I apologize for taking this to some degree, but that's why it's important when we had this,
yeah, that is.
When we did this training and talking about what that looks like in a classroom, in a corrections, because you have to think of things of those like fidgets, but can it be used as a weapon? Can it be used for this? How's it going to be used? Is that tolerated in the classroom? Are the teachers willing to accept those type of things? Because those kids need to be able to fidget, whether it's doodling on some paper or fidget. Like, what does that look like in a corrections classroom because of safety concerns?
And that is one that you talked about. And that's one of the ones when I first came to my role, we had an agency send us all these fidget spinners and random toys. And the first thing, because we had never done it, and then working in corrections, they say everything's a security concern. It's a security. Oh, why is it? Well, it just is, and you just could get away with it. And now you got like prove it, like how, like looking at this little ball. Well, they can throw this ball. Like I promise you, you can never hurt me with this ball. You can drop 10,000 of them on me at a time. Like just educating the staff on the different things, and also even educating the people who make fidget spinners and stuff like that. Like, okay, have them make them correctional grade, have them so folks can't hurt themselves, have them make them medical grade. And so just sharing that information and just getting that information out there, because we don't want to exclude somebody because it's the easy thing to do. We don't want to say, well, our neurodivergent kid may have benefited from fidget spinner, but this is a security concern, so we're not going to use it. No, somebody make the ones without it. Or getting under staff, like, you can't, even with this thing, like you can't hurt yourself with it. Like you and getting folks to understand, you can't swallow it, you can't do anything.
Yeah. Talk about kind of the correctional classroom. I think a lot of folks listening might not really know what any of this kind of looks like. What does a correctional classroom actually look like day to day?
Oh my God! Well, ours, I would only speak for Rhode Island because I came from another state, which would look completely different. But in Rhode Island, so our class sizes are really, really small. And when I first came to the job, I learned quickly, if you cancel school for the kids, tell the kids they cannot go to school. Again, most of these are kids who did not go to school ever in life, or when they went to school, it was the fight and the interaction with the teachers really wasn't the best. Their experience wasn't good. But when they come into a correction setting, at least mine in particular, they if you say you can't go to school, all hell is gonna break loose. Like the kids actually love one. One, you're safe. Again, we have we call them juvenile program workers, or we have a staff member that sits right outside the classroom with the kids, so he or she is monitoring them the entire time. But that's just become like a clock on the wall. Like the students don't even pay attention to the staff member anymore because they have such small class sizes with their instructor that is that they get individualized lessons. Now, there are concerns in that. I mean, not concern. Well, the how can I say this? The issue with that is because our population is so transient, coming in and going. So we don't have like a first grade, second grade, third grade, blah blah blah. So we group the kids by where they live at, and so teachers may be working with a kid at a ninth grade level, a 12th grade level, and a fifth grade level, all in the same class. But the benefit of that, one of our teachers have been around for a long time, so they're used to it. Well, we also use a hybrid method as well. So they use the computer technology as well as the in-person instruction. And with the class sizes being so small, it's easier to do. Now, I'm sure the teacher would love to just stick with one grade level and say, like, look, I'm just dealing with ninth grade science today, but it's more than that. But we also have, our teachers are also certified through what's called RIDE, Rhode Island Department of Education. So they're actually real teachers, because some are like, real teachers? Yes, they're real teachers. They're not substitutes. They've been in this world, and they've been trained by the regular school system, but they work in corrections. It's in a corrections building. And probably, I think every teacher has at least double digits in there, 10, 20 years. And we don't have a lot of teacher openings because of the small class sizes. We still give our kids breaks. Like, we still get spring break and summer break. We still have summer school. We have after school. We also offer driver's ed in the school. You name it. Everything a kid from a traditional school would get, we get. This actually, in 2 weeks, we say the best day you can have inside of our facilities, a graduation date. And every year we've been working to graduate, probably my numbers with the number we have now, at least 25% of our population. Now, granted, remember, these kids were kids who weren't even coming to school at all. Because of the work we did with credit recovery and the small class sizes, kids actually get to graduate. And it's exciting. Some kid like, I didn't plan on graduating. We had one youth, and I love talking about him. Well, I'm gonna say gender, but we had a youth. I'll call everybody Little Johnny. We had Little Johnny the other day. I got to attend his because in Rhode Island, in order to graduate, you have to do like a senior project, and it has to be approved by the Department of Education, not just your school. And so our school principal, Dr. Dos Santos, she sent it to my email like, hey, Larome. She sent to everybody like, come support this youth, which we typically try to do. I watched his presentation, and it was, just take a wild guess what it was on. What he presented on. Nope. One more. Say one more guess. You're talking about being a neurodivergent youth itself. And it was so impactful. And from that, Ben, it goes back to the superintendent, because he mentioned it, and myself as well. He was like, oh my God, I'm dealing with this too. And we're like, I'm dealing with it too. And so to hear youth, a 17-year-old little young man mention that, hear the staff members say like, wow, this is so good. This is so good. I understand that. I'm dealing with this too. Thanks for putting it into perspective for me. And I just forgot about that until just right now. I'm telling the story. But my point in telling that story, he's one of the outliers who have been with us a little bit longer than usual. I think he had been with us 18 months or maybe 2 years, but he had came in and had low to no credits and everything. And he started going to school, started doing what he had to do. He took the hardest class with the highest amount of caseloads you can take. And he graduated a year early while in jail. Could you imagine that? So this under 18-year-old graduated high school at 16 or 17. And he talked about how it was neurodivergency as a superpower. I think that's what he explained it as. It was just phenomenal. It was eye-opening for me. So anytime I can talk about this young man, I'm like, I really want to talk about him. So that's kind of so our school day. I mean, of course we get some. It's still school too. So the students walk out of class, they argue with each other. It's a regular school day, but the rewards is like phenomenal, because they're young people doing young people things. But to see them graduate, and our graduations at the facility is I love it. The governor comes. The attorney general comes, the chief judge comes. Most of the elected officials and dignitaries, they come not just for votes or anything like that. They come as themselves, as supporters. I just say like, hey, you're our young people. We really believe in you. We brought in so many dignitaries to speak. We brought an author in, Dr. Ralph Murphy from he's in East Cleveland now, but he wrote a book called I Hate School Till I Figured It Out. Former Providence College PC Friars basketball coach coming in. So we get big names to come in and want to work with these youth. We have a local attorney coming in this year. So it's a beautiful day. It's one of my
In
favorite days. I haven't
Ohio,
missed one ever.
I mind you, this was the early 2000s though, but it looked like so I was a treatment specialist. So in the morning, I would take the kids to the classroom. There were roughly maybe 3 or 4 classrooms, 6 to 8 kids, and I would literally just sit outside the classroom while the teacher instructed. And then if anything would happen, if I need to take a kid out for behavioral reasons or for appointments, then to like with a social worker or a counselor that I would do so, and then they would rotate. Each class was about an hour and 15 minutes. And then lunch would be back at their pod. Their pods consisted of maybe, again, just depends on how many kids were um, in at that time. And we be there for lunch for about an hour, then go back. So they have pretty much a traditional school day. It's just that they didn't have the transitions. They didn't have gym, music, art. However, they did have access to the gym facilities after school hours, and they would do it during that time. I can't imagine it's changed dramatically from since then.
So it sounds like, and I know you can't speak for other states too much, but it sounds like it can really differ a lot from state to state.
Oh, it does differ a lot from state to state. And again, that's not to say, well, I guess you would say some states are doing better than others because we always rank things. So, but no state has it perfectly, but I would also say that no state is doing a horrible job. Every state wants to do the best that they can do. I believe all states, I'm not one of really speaking absolutely, but all states are really working hard to make sure that we give our youth the education that they need and paying attention to neurodivergency. I sit on a lot of national boards, working with youth boards in particular. And so actually, as a result of this podcast and our time with Anthony and knowing Anthony, I'm going to make sure that this still is elevated because this is still not an area where I think it gets talked about enough. So earlier you asked about what I hope everybody take. The thing that I'm taking from this is to make sure that at least right now, while I have a platform and have a voice, and that sometimes people listen to make sure that this is something that's covered and understood by others.
Yeah, no, I love that. How are neurodivergent youth identified or misidentified in the system?
Well, I would say, how are they misidentified in the system? It depends on the team you have working with you because of, fortunately in my state, what we do is the first thing, as soon as a kid comes into our facility, at least during waking hours, he or she sees a nurse. Like that's the first person you see, so you see a medical professional. And then by the next morning, if you're not at court or anything like that, you see an entire team. So you'll see a pediatrician, you may see an eye doctor, a dentist, but you also see your mental health clinicians as well. And they also do a family history. So they're working, hopefully, if a parent knows about their youth or a guardian knows about their youth, they can share the information. But if not, we have all the right people in place to help with those diagnoses. And our kids also, we have a treatment team around them. So every kid has one or two social. Actually, every kid has a minimum of 2 social workers because we have a school social worker who works with every single kid, but they also have an individualized social worker in their unit. In addition, they have a unit manager, and I think 3 to 4 of my unit managers are all clinicians. And so we have a joke that in my facility, you can't go 10 feet without you can't take 10 steps without seeing a social worker in our facility. But that's intentional, so we can make sure kids are getting services that they need. Of course, in addition to the medical services,
And
but also
outside
the behavioral health services as
and
well.
outside of like Rhode Island, and
But that's how they're
in certain
identified.
cases, the number one reason why kids are or teachers aren't aware is just a lack of miscommunication. And so when those kids come into those facilities, and their records are being mailed from the school system, and you may get the IEP or the ETR, a couple weeks, 3 to 4 weeks afterwards, and by that time, the teacher's already is instructing, providing lessons or what have you, and maybe forgets to look at the IEP, maybe forgets to look over the ETR, if they have that. We're just assuming if they have an IEP or ETR, if they're neurodivergent, and then looking to see what those diagnoses are. And maybe, and I say this from experience where a kid came in and the intervention specialist looks over the IEP just does a glance over and just looks at the goals and objectives, but doesn't look over to see maybe they have a rare form of a genetic disorder or something else. And then they forget to tell the teacher. And then you find out later when they say, oh, you talk with the parents, like, oh, you didn't know they had this diagnosis. And you're like, oh, I didn't see that part on the ETR or whatever. So a lot of it comes with just the timing of when the information gets into the school system, or, but also if they don't have an IEP or an ETR, it's important to have a system and a structure like Larome just described in Rhode Island, where you can't go, 10 feet or 10 minutes without talking to a social worker, because through all those conversations, those professionals are going to understand and learn, like, okay, I'm going to look at the IEP, I'm going to look at the ETR. If I don't see this, then maybe we need to get an assessment completed while we're here, because we're going to be here for a while. Let's take advantage of this and get these things corrected and get you to the right interventions that you may need.
How do sort of historical beliefs about neurodivergence still show up in modern correctional and school practices?
I think, repeat the question one more time. I heard it, but I'll make sure I heard it right.
Yeah, I'm wondering about sort of the kind of historical beliefs, the early kind of thoughts on neurodivergence. How does that still show up in modern practices?
Well, avoidance in certain communities. I talk about my own community as well. We were told, well, people had any kind of thing dealing with their psyche or anything like that. The one, you would either get it prayed out of you, so you wouldn't go seek help. And so, and again, it wasn't a slight, it's just the way things were at that time. Now, was it right? I don't know. But it's because of my communities, at least I'll speak for my family. So my community, I mean, my family, we would go to church and had a pastor pray it away from, which that didn't really, well, or we would pretend it didn't happen. You send that person down south, or they didn't come out. Or you just pretend it didn't happen. You just like, Lord, like everything is just quote unquote normal. And you would deny it. So we'd be in denial about it. Or, okay, some people wanted to do something, they just didn't have insurance or services, or they didn't know who to go to get services. And it wasn't something that was talked about. So we had to play with the card who'd been dealt. Okay, how do I figure this out on my own? And again, it felt so isolated because we didn't know everybody else was dealing with something as well. We didn't understand the spectrum. We just understand my kid in my house at this time. What do I do? And I'm lonely. Can I talk to somebody? Can I not talk to somebody? And you look at some instances, even to this day, although while we're having this conversation, it's still not as normalized as it really should be or as it could be. And so some people still send isolation. Some people still go to the pastor to take it away. Some people still send the kid down south. But now it's more acceptable with more services. And because of podcasts like yours and the work that you're doing as well, Ben, is getting this message out there like, oh, I'm hoping as a Black man, I'll speak. I'm hoping that some Black families where I'm from is like, oh, okay, I get it. I can do something. It's not normal. When I first came to Rhode Island, we had a dear friend of mine. He was head of the vets at the time. He was a big old Black man, and he was speaking with our former governor at the time, talking about just mental health in general. And the theme was, it's okay not to be okay. But I probably was 38 around that time. I was a younger guy. But just hearing him say that was like, okay, it's all right now. And so even me in my position, blah, 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 but still, so I'm hoping that people listening to this podcast or seeing this podcast will find something that resonates in them to get rid of that historical stuff, like to not worry about the old school way of doing stuff, but getting services, becoming a servant too as well, helping people, understanding, not labeling, not targeting, and not being ashamed. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Again, I publicly stated on an international podcast that I'm playing with a fidget spinner and showed you all my toys. Like there's nothing to be.
Yeah, no, it's funny because as a former educator and principal, we were sending them to you. We were your pipeline. We kept you, employed and whatnot. And we have to take some ownership and as educators and being a part of that that problem. And I know a lot of times hearing it from a lot of teachers, you know, it was a lot of blaming that went on as well in terms of, oh, he just crazy. You know, even within our, oh, he just crazy. Ain't nothing wrong with that boy. That's what you would hear from the parents, you know, or just whoop them. If you whooped them enough, they wouldn't be bad. They wouldn't do this or whatever. And so then we created a whole nother level of trauma um, and fear you know, for those children, and then going to school and then not having proper training or the training to really help those kids out. And then when we would see these instances of misbehavior or whatever, not addressing them, not having the resources to provide a social worker. And so as an early administrator, being able to provide wraparound services, being able to provide and have a Boys and Girls Club a part of our school, having social emotional learning practices embedded within our school. Those things helped. And did it help everyone? Not at all. However, through being out in the community, seeing former students still remembering things that they learned while in elementary school, or saying thank you because we learned about academic choice. We learned about morning meetings. We learned about the 3Ds of determination, dedication, and discipline, and how that affected us. And understanding that what we were bringing into the school, we were trying to push into the community, because what was coming into the school from the community was, unfortunately, in certain areas, violence, despair, poverty. And what we were trying to do was the things that we were teaching in the school, we were trying to then help to get that generalized within the community to change the community. But there's also a lot of blaming within the community, blaming within community directors, teachers. And one of the things I like to share, you know, when I would do my trainings is that, you know, like the high school teachers, they would blame traditionally who for the kids not coming prepared. They would blame the middle school teachers. And then the middle school teachers would then blame the elementary teachers. How come these kids aren't coming in prepared? And the elementary teachers would then fight with one another. The sixth grade teachers would blame the fifth grade teachers, and it would go down. And then eventually the kindergarten teachers would blame the preschool teachers. Preschool teachers then blame who? Parents. Right. And then it goes even further, because then, and I'm not just making this up, it goes even further in terms of now the parents are then blaming who? The daddy. The daddy's not around. We have all these communities with the lack of fathers in the community and in the home, and then we're blaming the fathers for things not happening or whatever. That blaming would just keep going. Well, it's funny you say that. The dad blames the man. The man is keeping him down. That's but if you think about it, that's how it goes. When you really, I mean, like, it just keeps going down, and we keep blaming. And when you blame and you don't blame in balance, you're taking away ownership. And that's what happens, because if I can just sit here and blame and blame and blame, I don't have to take any accountability for the things that I'm doing. And so from that standpoint, that's how historically we then get into the correction system, because that blaming keeps going. Then those teachers, well, why are you here? Well, if this wouldn't have happened, if this wouldn't have happened, if this wouldn't have happened, if this person wouldn't have done this, if this person did this or whatever, but we still continue to blame, and we don't blame in balance.
And I was just you talk about neurodivergency in the classroom. You know, it was labeled just as bad behaviors.
Excuse me.
And then, like you said, Anthony, you guys kept us busy. Thank you, saying that with sarcasm. But then from the bad behaviors, they would tell the kid, like, you're gonna end up in jail. You're gonna end up in jail. Then we put police officers in the classrooms. I'm sorry, not in classrooms, in schools. And they would say the kid acting up, not understanding, like, no, there's just adolescent behavior or neurodivergence, or whatever the case may be, or just overreacting at times. We put kids into the juvenile justice system. So like you said, I look at how many less kids would have been impacted by the juvenile justice system had we understood neurodivergency, or had we had appreciated neurodivergency earlier, back in the 90s, back in the 80s, back in the 90s, even back in the 2000s. You can see some, if you look at the juvenile justice numbers, Ben, right now, from the 80s to 90s. 80s, they were going up, 90s really high, 2000s, they're starting to plateau. And then 2010 is 2020, they're decreasing again. But I attribute that to part of it, one, the attention on youth in incarceral spaces and the impacts of that and long-lasting effects and the cost of it, but also to understanding and appreciation for neurodivergency. Like, hey, these aren't bad kids, whatever you want to call them. These are kids that are dealing with stuff, and what can we as adults do? Because I always had this thing, it's never the kid's fault. Even if a kid comes to jail, if a kid does something, some adults and some systems have failed them along the way multiple times. And until we get to the point we understand that, then we're going to keep being a dog chasing us around.
I agree.
Yeah, you got me thinking about sort of the systems in general, and it sounds like a neurodivergent kid is pretty blessed to be in a system that's under you, Larome, and I wonder about sort of, and I realize this must be a challenge for everybody. There are so many other sort of systems that you don't have control over that lead to these kids, getting into the system, and I often feel like there's probably a lot of neurodivergent kids that don't even belong there. Like you've probably been like, what's this kid even doing here? What happened out in the streets that resulted in this kid ending up here? Was that a case of, a lack of understanding by police? I know there's been a lot more work lately being done to sort of educate police about neurodivergent folks. Is this a lack of understanding in the court system? Is this a product of sort of, intersectionality? We're seeing, certainly, I've had a lot of conversations on the podcast about, Black autistic kids and they're sort of even more increased prone to, being dealt with inappropriately by police and so on. What kinds of things kind of come up for you when you're seeing a kid in the system that, and I realize on some level no kid belongs there, but you're seeing these kids in the system that just, it doesn't make sense that they're there. And what kind of work have you tried to do, I think, being at that executive level to try to sort of maybe influence systems before kids get in there?
Yeah. I'm not saying this because I work here, but I do believe the Rhode Island Family Court does a great job of triaging kids who, prior to making a decision for them in general, whether to send them to me or not send them to me or do something else with them. So I really, because as somebody who sits on a national level, I see I see and I hear different things. So I do believe that Rhode Island is on the forefront of doing this. Are we perfect? No, but as close to perfect as I believe we can get. Obviously, we need, and the reason why I say it because we're still working to get better. Like we didn't say like, oh, we reduce the number of blah 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 and just stop. But we're not saying this, so we actually continue to keep working to get better. But you mentioned something earlier, and I appreciate it. I love nothing more than a compliment. Those who know me know I love a compliment. We thought kids are blessed to have in a system like me with neurodivergence, something like that. I want to say he hasn't saw me, but I'm not saying this because I got the role. It's really not me solely. It's my team. Like seriously, I talked about they freed me up. Well, one because they challenged me. Talk about the one little Johnny I was talking earlier about who has everybody's name Little Johnny, so I'm not giving information out. But little Johnny, the kid that experienced that having dealing with neurodivergency, and he does have some issues, but the empathy the staff has, the understanding of it, because them bringing their lived experience and they're bringing it as a parent or as someone living this, they really make it a good place, as good of a place as it could be for someone dealing with neurodivergency while in the carceral system. So imagine how that works. But the staff, they wrap themselves up so much and get so invested into them to the point where, again, it's a perfect no, but they do such a good job. But because of the team doing this, they're able to free my time up. So one, I don't have the skill set that they have to even solve that problem or to best serve them solely by myself. but they allowed me to go talk about this information and to talk about because other states reach out to me very often and say, Larome, you've had this issue. How do you deal with it? I can say, hey, talk to my clinical director, Dr. Mary, she can tell you this. Talk to Principal Dos Santos, they can talk to Superintendent Terry. And we love sharing the information we do. And of course, we do outreach as well to get that information in there. So yeah, it's my team. They free me up I get to information share, get to share the information, but I get to learn as well. And we get to be good partners with other folks as well. Say like, hey, you're dealing with this.
And
How would
that's
you
where I
deal with
think
that?
BCBAs could lend their hand in the corrections facilities. Just even just as I'm listening to Larome talk and thinking about how and like they don't choose who they get, right? So they get who they get, and they're like, okay, now work this magic. And so when you think about it from from an analytic behavior analytic standpoint, I have to think. I can't help but to think of the environmental barriers that are contributing to these behaviors. Now, when you're in a correctional facility, you're in a confined place. It's predicated on routine, structure, what have you. But those individuals are then going back to an environment where all those other barriers are in place. And I know there probably are um, different aspects of the correctional facilities that address the parents and whatnot. But if we're not addressing those environmental barriers and putting contingencies in place, so have you, we understand and see why the recidivism rate is where it's at. To my knowledge, it's probably around the same that it's always been, which is around 70 to 75%. But we have to also look in how are we addressing the parent. And so from that behavior analytic part of looking at parent training, like what, how is that, not saying that it would solve everything, but if those parents can have some behavior analytic um, knowledge, contingencies, okay, antecedent interventions, a visual schedule, just those little things that may help out in terms, and that's where I believe ABA, a BCBA can be helpful in those realms, is to say, hey, look, you know, when you're having these parent training meetings, or even if it's every quarter, or if it's every month, or if it's quarter pointed, these are some things to consider. Now, with that being said, I understand resources. You got to have people to be able to do those things, have the expertise to do those. You don't want to step outside of your expertise. But that's how I see ABA playing a role in corrections, not just in the educational system, but then being able to generalize those behaviors that they learned once they were in for those 6 to 12 months or however long. How are we going to generalize those behaviors outside when they leave?
And you talked about the budget piece, which is a really big important part. And I still go back to one of Ben's earlier question. What can we do at the executive level? I hate that you asked me that question now, Ben, because I keep thinking about it, like every time somebody says something. But I think we do need to really, really invest in this as well. Whether it's BCBAs in the classroom or understanding neurodivergency or BCBAs in corrections. And just, there's a saying, show me your budget, I'll show you your priorities. Because the three of us can talk about this all we want to. And in leadership, whatever that is, whoever that is, can say it's important. But yeah, if there's no line item for that, then it's really not that important. It's kind of one of the feel good thing. It's kind of like earlier we talked about DEI, like, okay, DEI is initially want to do this, but we're not really supporting it. And so it's the same thing. We need to really, you have to resource it again with funds, with authority, with people and stuff like that. So and until we really serious about hopefully we take it. I don't want to say people aren't serious, but I say we need to take it to the next level and make sure this is resourced appropriately and accordingly,
And
with money and power and authority.
Anthony, I'm thinking about your experience kind of working in schools, in corrections, the collaborations, with Larome. I work a lot in adult services, and conversations that I often have with early intervention practitioners are, with early intervention practitioners that have had an opportunity to work with adults and be exposed to sort of the adult context, I often ask them, does that change sort of how you do early intervention when you see, the potential outcomes or the potential trajectory prognosis of some of these kids you're working with at 3, 4, 5 years old. You're focused on some of these skills, maybe forgetting about these other important skills. And then, these kids who now have become adults are in a rut because, maybe they weren't toilet trained, or maybe they didn't learn some of these safety skills or some of these sort of basic skills and focus more on academic skills for whatever reason. Does it change sort of the way you do early intervention? I'm curious, kind of paralleling that conversation to sort of the school to prison pipeline kind of conversation that we're constantly having. Does knowing, what possible outcomes there might be for some of these kids, in the context of corrections, change the way you do your work in schools?
I think of it from a backward by design standpoint, and I didn't do it purposefully, but it was one of the greatest things that I could have gone through from a career standpoint of working in corrections, to see what it would look like in working with, in the juvenile justice system where we had kids that were 17, 18. I was also fortunate enough to work at a residential adult day program where those individuals at Bittersweet Farms had been there, since the, early 70s. And there was no ABA programming, and there was no interventions provided. And their classrooms were, next to the boiler room in the elementary school or down in the basement, and they didn't receive services or what have you. And you see what was happening. You see the need for teaching independent living skills, whereas a lot of those places where we were just designed like, we're just going to worksheets, keep them busy, keep them out of trouble, and then hope for the best afterwards. And the parents didn't know any better to question those type of things. And so going back to your question as it relates to the prison to pipeline, for having educators to have some knowledge, even during maybe their undergrad process of methods classes or whatnot, just getting some type of exposure, whether it be in real time, whether it be through virtual, just seeing what it looks like, getting some testimonials from either past incarcerated youth that are now adults or teachers, just to give them a background so they kind of understand what it could look like at the most extreme level in terms of education. Now, we do have alternative learning centers like in Ohio, which, for those individuals that weren't successful in the traditional self-contained classroom and they needed a more restrictive environment, those classrooms mimic the corrections classroom more than anything. However, the difference is that you're in a correctional facility and you don't get the leisure of being able to move around. And so some teachers get that exposure, and it's not for everybody. Even if you have a special ed background, that's why they have the mild to moderate to severe. But I believe having some access to understanding of maybe something you may enjoy, but it does take a toll on educators because it's a lot of energy that you're expending on a daily basis, because it's a very heightened atmosphere when you're working with individuals, adults, teenagers with severe behaviors.
Something you were saying too, and something you mentioned earlier, Larome, when we're talking about kind of what the correctional classroom looks like, small amount of students, some good staffing. It sounds like in some contexts, and I'm wondering if this is sort of where that the good work of the court system around triaging you were talking about. Is there some context where they're like, because it sounds like there might be some situations where these kids being in this correctional classroom is actually is better for them than being in the the regular kind of public school classroom. Like they're getting more attention, there's smaller class sizes, there's some real benefits to them being able to access the programs there in corrections. I'm not sure what the question here is, but is it possible that it's good for some of these kids, not from sort of this sort of punishment based, go to prison, go to jail, scared straight lens, that having these kids enter the juvenile correction system at a young age, hopefully, and I'm not sure how it all works, sort of when they turn into adults, but presumably a lot of these kids don't end up with records because it's a juvenile thing versus an adult thing, that there's a real benefit to having some of these kids be in this system, and it can be actually a real win for them to have entered the correctional system in the correctional facility.
Yeah, I try to not look at it as as a win for kids coming to a correction facility, because it's never a win. But I do appreciate, and I've heard this many times, that people are starting to understand the work that we do with those kids who have been placed with us. Because again, we've been referred to as a great placement for the kids. And at first I heard that comment, I was like, it's a testament to the work that my staff are doing, my team are doing. But I also asked and challenged folks like, what are we not doing outside to prevent people from coming here? And that's the real, that's what the real focus should be on, is on prevention. Since I came to Rhode Island, we have, during my years of service, we've reduced our population. Probably, I'm not a mathematician, so I know that a couple of educators on this line, so about 60% at least, at least 60 or 70%. I forgot what the real number is, but it was by a lot of kids. I think we have a building that they could fit 96 kids in there. We probably have like 30 in there today. So we working to really, really, really decrease it. And that's because of work we do with our partners, focus on prevention, focus on diversion. I know our family court does a phenomenal job at a diversion program. Now, of course, I mean, just because it's human nature, we always question, like, how this kid getting in here? What is this kid here for? Just like we questions are, why didn't they let this kid out? I mean, that's just human nature to question. But I really do have I really do believe in the work that the family court is doing. I think the Rhode Island Family Court should be a model nationally. They probably kill me for saying it's like, Larome, leave us alone. But I really think that the work that they're doing is a model of how to just make sure the right kids are where they need to be, whether it's incarceration, whether it's nothing else. But in the point of doing that too, I want to make sure that when kids come to us, that we call ourselves the Rhode Island Training School, a school. Our kids go to school. And the goal of going to school is to come back better than you were the day before. And so when the kid is placed with us, that he or she comes back better. If they're with us 1 day, 1 hour, 1 year, 4 years, that they're going to come out better, more productive than they would have, because we want to show that youth are getting habilitated. Youth are understanding things they need. Youth are developing appropriately. But I also believe that too, that our in Rhode Island in general, the use of our juvenile justice facility is a last resort, because everybody knows the work that we do. I'm not going to talk about the goats that we have, the ducks that we have, the music programs that we have, you name it, we have everything in there, the clinical services, the great staff, the education, all that great stuff. But people are better off in their communities, in their homes. But for the few kids who don't, who that's not an option for at this time, then we are a good place to be. But yeah, because sometimes the judges or courts hand are tired. Like, I got two bad decisions. I got two decisions to make. One of them worse than the other one. Which one can I live with? And I want them to say, like, not that we're going out recruiting for people, because we're not. But if they say, like, Larome, we're sending this kid to your facility, then the kids are going to get the necessary service they need for the smallest period of time that they're in there. Because one thing we don't do in Rhode Island, we don't have these long, exhaustive sentences. I look at some states and they kids get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. As a young person, like, wow, they get the whole high school sentence.
Mm-hmm.
You get 4 years at 13 years, like high school. I mean, we don't really have those, and we're a pretty relatively safe state, safe community. I mean, of course, things are going to happen, but hopefully I answered your question.
100%. I think, and I feel that. I mean, I think I appreciate. No one wants kids in corrections, in the correctional system, and certainly in an ideal, it's a better life to be in community, to be with family, to be have access to the world and choices and whatnot, versus being in a, in a facility of kind of any sort. I think at the same time, though, I think you also answered my question in that I think there are kids where they don't have access to family. They don't have connections in the community. And this is probably a lot of the reason why they ended up where they ended up in the first place, was because of a lack of supports available. And so sometimes, getting them in the system, can provide them a sense of basic safety, and maybe start building a few skills, building a little resilience to kind of get them back into the community. So I think that's really important. I'm wondering also, kind of related to that, are there also programs within corrections or collaborations with some of these other professionals? I guess the question is, what work is being done in terms of the transition back into community and to sort of, as Anthony said, there's these high recidivism rates and so on. What work is being done to ensure to help these kids not have to come back again?
Okay. Yep. And let me add one piece to that, and I'll come to that question. Because also some days I've heard some kids say that they'll, in lieu of coming to the facility, or after leaving the facility, they get placed to another placement. And some kids say they'd rather come back to us. They're like, just send me back to the facility called the training school. I'd rather be back at the training school. Just send me back there. I'll do the rest of my time there. And that's one of the things that really hurts, because I'm asking the community, why? Why does he or she, usually it's boys, why does he want to be here? And so that's something that I toil around with as well. And again, it's a lot of different reasons. Some for safety, some for stability, some just don't know any better. But it's different reasons, but I'm always working to do that. So the segment to your second part of your question about like what are our transition back like, or reentry services, we tell everybody we don't wait until, well, remember we as kids and watch cartoons and people be in jail, they put a dash every single day, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you see when they get out. The tally mark, thank you. Yeah, they would tally mark everything. And that's one thing, when I started doing this work, I made it a point to never do that. I don't want kids to focus on when they're getting out. So the first thing we do is remind staff, with kids when they first come to us, hey, you're one day closer to going home. So look at that mind shift in general. If they're saying you got X amount of days, hey, you're one day closer to going home. Every day you wake up, and understand, teaching the kids, what are you going to do during this time? One thing that we do is we keep kids busy. Their days are structured, non-freaking stop. It exhausts me just reading the schedule. But we have a structured activity, leisure activity, and recreation activity. The structured activity is the things you have to go to. Like, we have compulsory education. So any kid that comes to our facility, regardless, he or she could have could have 10 PhDs, a JD, and a MD, but yet you still got to go to school. So everybody has to do that. So that's part of how we structure day with school. And of course, we have English, math, science, blah, blah, blah. We also have yoga, we have pet therapy, we have a garden program, and we also have, we call it home ec growing up. What's it called now, Anthony?
Right, yeah.
Where you learn to cook and
culinary
home
arts.
Excuse me. I'm just showing my age. So. But we also have barbering and stuff like that. So we're trying to get the kids real life skills while they're in there. So we structure the activity. That's a structured day. Then we get the kids recreation time. Recreation, that's shooting basketball inside, shooting outside, blah, blah, blah. And then leisure time. Leisure time is pretty much your bedtime. Because we give you time throughout the day to get a couple of little naps or sit downs in and burn some energy off. So we structure our kids for a day. But we also want to get the kids used to when they get out. Because again, we tell them you're one day closer to go home. We try to do what a real life should look like. So we try to copy real life as best as we can. So again, your day wakes up, we'll feed you, we send you you get dressed, get ready for school, feed you, send you to breakfast, you go to school, you come back from school, go to lunch, and you come back and you go to your treatment, your program, whatever the case may be. But we don't wait to do those hardcore introductions. We're like, hey, little Johnny's been here for 6 months, he leaves tomorrow, go call somebody. Like when I used to work in the adult correction system, you wait till folks got out and say, okay, when you get out, here's a phone book, go call it for a job, Go find register for school, go find a house, and that was that. We don't do that. So the first day folks come into we talk about you're on Monday closer to going home. But in doing that, we bring the community inside the first day. So we say like, hey, you're going to work with Anthony and Ben as your mentors. Anthony and Ben are meeting with the kid right away. You're building that rapport. So when that young man or young lady leaves you, he's already, he understands who you are. He's already ready to make that connection. And if you don't, then you can do it. We're also working with the families immediately. Like the first one, earlier you asked a question about how do we find out their neurodivergence or whatever they're dealing with. We call the family right away too. So the first day after they see the nurse, we contact the family. We involve the family in meetings nonstop. Like from the school meeting, the clinical team meetings, the behavior meetings, the families already in there. Because our goal is to get this young man back into the community as quick as possible. But also when kids leave, we also have other agencies we partner with. Some of our providers, they come into the school the first day. They come into the facility the first day, and they work with the kids. And it may start just being a music program with the kids. The kid thinking they just learn how to make beats and stuff like that. But when a kid leaves, he or she's getting treatment from that group. They have social workers and everybody like that. And then the community knows. Then the community also, the community partners know that youth and their family, and that youth and their family know their community partner. And it's just a natural, it's just a soft handoff because
And if I
we
could,
try to have our staff there only if necessary.
no, go ahead. Sorry, there was a lag.
And then of course we work with. I was gonna say, and then of course we no. Anyway, sorry. Then of course we work with a lot of national groups as well. So we seek out grant funding and grant opportunities, not just for the sake of getting money, but for the sake of getting expertise and sharing our expertise. So we partner with folks at national levels and local levels to like how can we better do this work? Because it's easy once we get complacent and say like we've been doing it, we got good results and just stop it. My constant focus is on our team's constant focus on continuous improvement. What can we do to continue to make it better and to stay a student of this work that we do? Because the same thing that worked 3 years ago.
No,
don't
you're
work today
good.
now.
Actually, what I
But we
wanted to
need be
piggyback on
further.
what you were
Sorry,
saying,
we haven't
because
done this
what
time.
you're providing is what they're not getting on the outside is the worst thing to have is sight without access. And those individuals that are out in the community, they have sight, but they don't necessarily have access because of all the different contingencies that's going around. Whether it be community or like individuals that they're not getting along with, or people that maybe they haven't built trust with. Now they get the opportunities to practice those skills. They get opportunities to identify their motivating operations. They get now access to reinforcement. They understand what their reinforcers are and how to access those. And now being in a facility such as yours, they're able to not only have sight and seeing these things, but now also having access. And when you combine sight with access, you present opportunities. And so that's what I love about all those different things that a correctional institution can provide, because now they're again having that access to reinforcement so that hopefully those behaviors and those routines and that structure are now then being generalized into a different setting, different subjects, or have you. And we're able to build that instructional or establish the instructional control if they actually are able to go back into a classroom setting. But again, releasing those individuals back into an environment where those contingencies are no longer in place and they're now being now introduced back to punishment, not receiving reinforcement, not having access but sight. We're just going to then continue to go through that perpetual cycle. And so again, I keep wanting to bring it back, or not bring it back, like taking what you said and applying how ABA can then be beneficial in that. And that's not a plug for you and I to come and speak to people around how to do that, but it's the truth. How can we take those motivating operations there and what's working there to then generalize it into other settings that those students are going to be exposed to?
Well, let's dig into that some more, Anthony. So, what are some adaptations that are essential for
we're looking at
applying ABA
replacement
and PBS in
behaviors. We're looking at
correctional settings?
providing differential reinforcement and for those individuals, but those teachers have to then know how to do that. They have to have exposure to that. They have to have training as it relates to that. And again, when you keep breaking it down, that then goes to funding, resources, and opportunities to do so. And so just providing opportunities for teachers, administrators to see that, okay, there's different ways, as we used to call it back in the 90s, like we want to put more tools in your toolbox. And that's, during that time, during professional development, like, oh, you just want to put more tools in your toolbox. This is essentially what we're wanting to do through PBIS, through ABA, through, again, funding, because principals, social workers, assistant principals, they don't have necessarily the time to do all of these different things. They don't have the time to go out and do parent training to make sure they're looking at the environmental barriers, any medical barriers that are potentially influencing these students. They don't have time to necessarily teach antecedent interventions. And so that's where that funding comes in, because now you have someone that can provide training for the teachers, for the support staff, for the individuals that's working with students that are what used to be called at risk are now called, at promise. And, you have all these different words that, to describe the kids that are struggling in the educational setting. Ideally, these are the type of things that's going to be important with implementing PBIS or whatever, is the system, because essentially we're shrinking the environment when we send them to Larome. We're shrinking the environment, and then we're increasing the environment when they come back out, but we're not giving them within the same parameters and the same interventions that they were successful with inside than when they're outside.
What does teaching replacement behaviors look like when safety and control are constant pressures?
Teaching those replacement behaviors is going to be important with that training and understanding what, instead of yelling, instead of yelling for the teacher, saying, I'm teaching, you can raise your hand, and it's going to serve the same function. However, in this setting, in school, this is how it needs to look. Now, in the community, with your friends, maybe yelling and screaming, maybe that gets you what you want. But understanding that, in different environments, the functions are going to look differently. And so I want to be able to teach, in order to get access to what you want, there's different ways to getting it. But if we're only teaching punishment procedures, or we're not combining that with reinforcement as well, then it may get an initial decrease in behaviors initially, but it's not sustainable if we're continually punishing and not teaching a replacement behavior. Whether it be, okay, instead of fighting with our hands, let's use our words. Let's use our, functional communication to communicate. Now, functionally, using my hands may communicate what I want, However, in this setting, right, in school, that's not going to work. In the streets, I'm not saying it's correct. However, using your hands functionally does communicate what you want. Maybe it works. You got UFC fighters, you got boxing. I'm like, so they communicate with their hands. They don't go out in the square, the octagon and talk it out, But in the school system, that's what's going to be more that's what's going to be helpful. It's not going to help to use our hands in the school system. It's not going to help to scream and yell at the teacher when we disagree with something, to use our hands. We're going to have to be able to communicate and verbally or non-verbally, whether or not you have an AAC device or however you communicate, without using our hands in violence. So, but again, it's that teaching of that ABA 101 to those individuals to show them what it looks like. Because if you don't know what you don't know, so you, again, go back to your default, saying, well, don't do this. And we go through, don't do that. You look at some of the rules in classrooms. Don't do this, don't do that. Don't talk this, don't do this, or whatever. But we're not teaching what we want to see. We're teaching what we don't want to see.
And what kind of interventions, thinking about other behavior analysts who might have this opportunity to work in correctional environments, what interventions sound good on paper, but often fail in correctional services?
Let me think about that. What do you think, Larome? Do you have...
I'm taking those down right now.
So that would be one of them. And I understand the correctional facility. You're going to have kids coming in at different types of the week, the year, or what have you. So one of the things also is understanding group dynamics. And anytime that you have a change in like a new kid coming in, there's a pairing process that needs to go in. And And that's what we call it in ABA. We pair, we build rapport, we take time. We don't introduce a lot of demands. We understand what environmental conditions or motivating operations help to reinforce that, or what reinforcers may be helpful for that child. Whereas, in the school system, we're like, oh, they come in, they do what we're doing right now, and they just fall in line without any regard with thinking of, and I'm not saying that all places do this, but not thinking of that pairing process, because now you have to think of the group dynamics. All right, well, this kid comes in and we're not introducing demands, but you have a kid that's been in there for 4 or 5 months that's had demands placed and expectations and whatnot. How does that look? So understanding or teaching that teacher, like, it's going to look different every time you get a new child or a new student in, and understanding group dynamics. There's storming, norming, and performing. And whenever you get a new kid in, it's going to be there's going to be a stage of where it's going to be storming. And then it's going to graduate, and it's going to be fluid. It's going to go and be probably norming at some point. And you get the same group of kids there for maybe 3 or 4 months. You're probably going to be at the performing part if you have these other contingencies in place in terms of open relationships, in terms of a morning meeting, afternoon meeting, being able to share academic choice, because a lot of times, like, well, no, this is science. We're going to do this assignment. They're going to do it this way. Everyone uses a pencil. Everyone uses a pen. This is the way it has to be, as opposed to, here's the assignment. How does that look for you to learn this concept? Whether it be, for some people, they may learn better by doing multiple choice, or maybe it's a project, or maybe it's a discussion, but having academic choice is also going to be helpful, because it doesn't put all the ownership right on that teacher, and it gives some buy-in for the student as well as to how they learn best for themselves.
And I'll add, just from my anecdotal, I would think, add to that, one, I would say denial, just being denial that anything, just denial speak for itself. I'll leave it there. The second piece is not educating your staff members, your team. And the third one is applying a one size fits all. Like, oh, we had little Johnny, he was neurodivergent, so we treat everybody, we treat little Johnny. And that's not the case either. So those are my 3: denial,
Perfect.
not education of the staff, and then applying a one size fits all.
So you guys just kind of all started with these presentations you were doing. Tell me a little bit about how that all went, and kind of what the feedback was like from the audience when you guys kind of came together and started presenting this information.
And that's of course for Anthony being an ABA, that he all about the data and stuff like that. But I can speak anecdotally, it went very, very well. I think I was a student, and I was co-presenter, but also a student of it. I learned it. We got great feedback. It's actually funny. Somebody just sent me a picture a few minutes ago while we were on this podcast. Somebody I haven't talked to in months, and sent me a picture of. It's hard to see it, but it's a me from that day presenting with Anthony with the orange shirt and everything. So about 20 minutes into this call, I just got this message just popped up. But I'll let Anthony speak, because Anthony actually did it.
And I'm glad you said that. But one of the greatest, well, first of all, it was there was only a few seats available in that session. So there were people actually sitting on the floor. And unbeknownst to Larome and I, one of the individuals identified herself afterwards of having, being on the spectrum, autism spectrum. And she stopped and she was like, that was one of the greatest sessions I've ever sat through, where I've heard it from different perspectives. And she's like, and I work in the corrections. She said, now, mind you, this is an international conference. So it wasn't just individuals from Pittsburgh. They were from all over the country. And she was like, that was very well put together. The way we pieced together, what was going on in Rhode Island, but also putting it in a behavioral analytic lens. And she was like, thank you very much. There was a couple other guys that were administrators that, they're like, I hadn't thought of it this way. And some of the things that I think we did, I talked about sending mixed messages and how that can be detrimental in the classroom setting. And I talked about everything that you say and everything that you do is important, because we often hear, do as I say, not as I do. And so I had a couple of little cool interactive activities with this with the participants that really illustrated it. And so they were like, wow, that was really powerful. So beyond what was completed on the survey and whatnot, just the feedback, and also waiting for Larome to leave the room because there was so many people waiting to talk to him to get information about what he was doing in Rhode Island. I don't know if you remember that, Larome. I was sitting there like, okay, let's go. We're ready to eat. We're ready to eat. Larome, people were just waiting outside the door to talk with him and whatnot. And so it went really well. Like, I really thought it went well. A lot of people hadn't really they've heard of ABA, but they didn't know of ABA. They didn't know what that, because the connotation is typically autism. It's typically, and then if depending on what type of research that you've done on ABA, you look at all the myths or what have you. I think one of the things we actually talked about was some of the myths of ABA. One of the key ones with bribery versus reinforcement, and just explaining that to them, you just saw like the light bulbs go off, like, oh, first then statements, like things that as ABA practitioners, it's just, you don't even think about it. But then for those who haven't been experienced or don't know it, like, they're like, oh. But what was so helpful, because the way I was explaining it was that although we're talking about it in a correctional educational framework, this applies everywhere. It applies, like, using this at home, using this at work, using this in the community. I don't know if you remember this, Larome, we also talked about comfort and solution. When talking with individuals and talking about their problems, whether or not when they're discussing this with you, are they discussing this for comfort or are they discussing this for a solution? Because if they're discussing it for comfort, I'm listening. If they discuss it for solution, now I'm listening with the intent that I'm going to provide a answer, because most of us want to provide an answer. You give us like, hey, this is what's going on in my life. This is what's going on, like, in the correct, and you just want to tell them what to do because you've lived it, or you think you have the best answer. But sometimes they just want comfort and just knowing that you're listening. And a couple of guys came, he was like, I'm using that with my wife. I'm using that. So a lot of these things that I discuss can be applied wherever you're at, whatever industry, whatever organization that you're working in. So I know it was basically how the session went, but I had to share that because it was really powerful.
And I do that same thing, the comforting solution, when I talk about too. I heard it before, but recognize I'm always, if I listen to, I don't say comfort versus solution, but I say pretty much that, like, okay, you want me to talk or you want me just to listen? Now, I'm fine either way. And I let folks know, like, because I heard you say it, if you want me to change halfway through, tell me just shut up and listen, or tell me shut up and give me some advice. Or I learned from that. Again, I said I was a participant, but I was also a student of it.
The third secret word is docket. Is there a plan in the future to bring this conversation over to
that
ABA
is the goal.
audiences?
I think it's just a
Anthony?
matter of
Larome?
just coordinating with, because right now is the call for proposals for different. Matter of fact, I just thought about this: the Black Men in Behavior Analysis Conference, Larome. I'm an invited speaker for something totally different, but we can also submit that same proposal to do it there, because that's again a whole genre, if you will, that last year at the summit we did not discuss, but we could potentially discuss if you're available. But we could talk about that outside of that. But I did tell him that I'm doing a presentation in Rhode Island, I believe in October. It's the CASE conference, and it's regarding special education, trauma, and feedback. But it's not an ABA conference though. So, but the goal is to get Larome with me and get him on the road with me at some of these conferences that I'm going to be speaking at. That's behavioral analytic in nature.
And for the shout out, Anthony,
I'm glad you asked.
You're
Thank
an
you.
invited
That
speaker
was
at
a
BMBA.
selfless
What are you going to
plug.
be talking about there?
So I'm going to be talking about supervision and mentorship for RBTs and BCBAs. And so this is a similar presentation that I did for the OHABA conference. And so I did that, and the great Dr. William Hayward was there. And he actually was one of those that approved it. So I figure if he approved it, then I can definitely get in and use that for my invited speaker presentation in September at the Black Men's Behavior Analysis Conference in Atlanta. Labor Day weekend, be there.
Yeah. Awesome. We'll put it out there. Larome, I'm kind of looking forward. What do you think is going to change system-wide to better serve neurodivergent youth in corrections?
We need to make it a priority. We need to make sure, like, and every entity can prioritize its own way by what's going to appeal to their constituents. But we need to make understanding neurodivergency a priority. It needs to be understood better. So that it's not just seen as, we just say kids who can't get right or kids who misbehave or kids who just different. But understanding that they're all kids as well. The second piece, we need to make sure that we resource it appropriately. Resource it financially, but also other again, I talked earlier in the podcast about this, about making sure they get authority, some power, respect, but money. Like you have to make it money, and you got to make it a priority. And you got to keep doing any and everything you can to reduce and remove all the stigma from it. We've gotten better, but we can easily slip and go back. I mean, you can look at the country now, the United States. United States now. You can look and see like pendulum shifts all the time. This has to be understanding neurodivergency and appreciation for neurodivergency has to be what I refer to as too big to fail. Like we can't go back. We can't go off the track. We can't go off the path. Like this is something that has to keep going. Like it needs to be as common or as easy as waking up in the morning or as breathing. It just needs to be involuntary. Like we understand. Instead of, we need to understand whether we stigmatize, whether we outcast, whether we label.
Well said.
Anthony, kind of what mindset or skill shifts do you think educator and behavior
having an
analysts
open mindset,
need?
understanding that there's things have evolved, ABA has evolved, education has evolved, and if we're staying stuck in that, one size fits all mentality, then we're going to continue to have these type of issues. We're going to continue to, and there's always going to be issues, but if we can adapt and understand that we can't have a one size fits all mentality as it relates to things such as behaviors, things such as education, and being able to change the paradigm and open your mind, I think will be helpful. I think that'll be helpful. And if you don't know anything about ABA, don't just rely what's on the internet. Don't rely just what's on Chat GPT. If you have an opportunity to meet a BCBA, to find a BCBA online or whatever, you'll find that we're nerds at heart. However, we love behavior. We love talking about behavior. We love applying the behavior principles to pretty much everything. And if we're not talking about it, we're probably thinking about it.
What gives you guys hope when you think about the future of this work?
It's one, like platforms such as this. I mean, the work that you and Anthony are doing, that gives me hope because that educated me as well, and it brought more awareness. So I'm hoping that people who listen to your podcast will also share it, and not just listen and share, but do something with it as well. That they'll force. I'm gonna use the word force their legislators to make this a priority. Folks, force people to invest in this. Force people to educate. I use the word force intentional because, we can try we gotta do more than just hope. And we gotta hold folks accountable and force them to make this, make sure our populations which is all of us. I mean, everybody have some sense of neurodivergency. So it's not just them, but
and
it's
my
us.
hope is that others through this podcast and through your dissemination of, not just what we're talking about, but all the great things that you're doing, Ben, and making others aware, is that they find value. Hope they find value in, the Behavior podcast. They see value in what you're bringing to the table and things that maybe others may not have never thought of. They're like, oh, I remember hearing about this on a podcast, or I was driving somewhere and I listened to the podcast and I never really thought about corrections and ABA. I never really thought about how this could potentially make a difference as a teacher, as an ABA practitioner, as someone that has a child that's neurodivergent. And so again, my goal is that they find value in what we bring to the table. And if it's something that they're willing to have myself and Dr. Myrick to come to speak about. We would love to entertain doing those type of things because that's what we love. That's what we love to do, and it shows in our work. It shows in his social media. It shows in my social media, because what we're attempting to do is just share what we love to do without asking for anything back. This is what we love to do. This is what brings us value as a part of our fraternity, achievement in every field of human endeavor, whatever that may be. We're going to find a way to achieve and help others to achieve, thus bringing us achievement.
Well, whether you're in corrections or behavior analysis, if you're listening out there, I highly encourage you to invite Dr. Myrick and Anthony to come and do a presentation at one of your conferences. They got some really cool stuff to share, and I hope you get some calls. Larome, Anthony, it's been great chat with you guys today. Learn a lot about the work you're doing. This is fantastic. Thanks for coming on.
It's always a pleasure working with Anthony.
I'll cash app you later.
Friend, mentor, frat, brother, advice. Yeah. But no, it was fun, Ben. Thank you so much to your audience.
You can find us on Instagram and TikTok and subscribe to our YouTube page at Behavior Speak. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.